David, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm so excited to hear a bit more about you. Can you tell me a little bit about growing up and where you grew up, where you were raised?
Well, my father was in the armed forces, so we lived all over the place. We lived all over Canada, from the East Coast to the West Coast. We lived in Germany for a while.
Oh, wow.
And as a matter of fact, I was born in Quebec City. So, and then I think, having lived in so many, I think I was in 10 different schools over my education. We moved that frequently.
Where was your favorite place to be stationed?
I think I would say Greenwood, Nova Scotia, in the Annapolis Valley. That's where I developed my love for rural living. Was in Greenwood. I belonged to a riding club, and I spent all of those years when we were in Greenwood basically outside all the time in the valley. And
That's amazing.
I think that's why I love it here so much in East Halifax, because it's this rural life here, agricultural life, is very much like what it was like in Greenwood for me.
So tell me a little bit, was it Nova Scotia that you went to school?
University, yes, I went to Dalhousie, yeah. And then I interned in Toronto.
So what made you decide to get into medicine?
I was always good at science and always enjoyed the idea of helping people. And so it just seemed like a good fit, the combination of the two.
So after graduating with your medical degree, you then went where?
Well, being gay in Halifax in the late 1970s and the early 1980s was not easy. So that's why I moved west and came to Toronto.
So it was difficult being gay in Halifax? Was it
not it was very small. It was very small and very conservative, as it was in most places. But it was I don't know. It was difficult.
And Toronto welcomed you differently?
It was easier to be anonymous.
So you moved into Toronto and then you decided to open a practice.
It actually, I did a bunch of things initially. I used to do a lot of emerge work. My first job was in Barry's Bay, about 2 hours west of Ottawa. And one of my next jobs was doing emerge in the old Orangeville Hospital in the early 80s. I used to do the weekend shifts, not all of them, but some of them on Friday nights and Saturday nights. We would start at 6 p.m. and finish at 8 a.m. the next day.
Wow.
And I would do Fridays and Saturday nights and stay at the North Peel Hotel for a few hours to get a few hours sleep. So that was one of my jobs. I did that for several years. The Orangeville Emerge Department at that time, it was, well, I know it's the same now, but it was an excellent little Emerge Department with very keen nurses, doctors, ambulance drivers, and it was a real pleasure to work there. And it was way back in the early 80s that I developed a love for Dufferin County.
Oh, and then you ended up back here many years later.
Ended up back here, yeah. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit. I know that you opened your own practice and you really took a decision to focus on opening a gay practice. And what was your inspiration to do that?
Well, I guess I was doing, these emerge shifts, and then I was also doing student health at McMaster in Hamilton. And then I met my partner, Chris Sharin, in 1985. And he had a regular job, and I was doing all these weird shifts, and it was interfering with our relationship. And I thought, this is time for a change. It's time for me to settle down. And there was a guy who had a practice at Young and Wellesley, and a gay guy, and his partner was a lawyer and got a job in Ottawa. So he decided to move to Ottawa. So I took over his practice. That was in 1987. Yeah, so Chris and I have been together for 2 years at that time. So it was time to settle down. It was time to have a regular job, let's say.
So in the 1980s specifically, I assume that it was probably quite difficult to market yourself as a gay-friendly facility without alienating others. Is that the case, or did you find that?
I don't really remember that being very much of a problem. Basically, My practice grew slowly. I was still doing other jobs, still doing emergency jobs, still working at student health at McMaster, the occasional shift. And so as my practice built slowly, and my practice built basically on referrals.
Wow.
And so I didn't advertise or anything. It grew based on referrals, and so anyone new coming was referred by someone that we already got along with well.
Right.
There was the occasional. I had the occasional situation. I can remember that there was an elderly woman that came to see me, and then once her kids found out that I was a gay practice, they took her out of my practice and found her another doctor. But that was rare. That was actually very rare. Those kind of situations.
Well, that's good to hear that you didn't experience as much of that. Now,
No, no, not really.
at that time in the 80s, why was there such a need to have specified health care for the gay community?
A lot of gay men in those days were quite closeted, and so they would. Many guys were married, and they would have their family doctor, let's say in Mississauga, and then they wanted in this is prior to my time. They would often have a doctor who could help them if they developed something like a sexually transmitted infection or something like that.
Right.
That was before me. Around my time when I started in the around 1987, the approach that I wanted was that I wanted to be the take all the care, provide all the care, and so that was the focus that I took, providing comprehensive care for everything, not just for sexually transmitted infections or gay-related problems.
I've heard from members of the gay community, even today, that it's more difficult if you identify as transgender or as gay to find good healthcare that you can trust. So I can imagine in the 80s it was even more so.
Yeah, you got to remember that I was in downtown Toronto, and so it was a different situation. And
Right.
there were quite a few of us, even in the 80s, who were openly gay doctors. I got to say that even in the in those days, I don't think it was all that difficult actually in downtown Toronto. Now it's completely different in in other
Right.
places.
Now,
So
at that time too, you were kind of right in the midst of the HIV and AIDS crisis. So can you tell me a little bit about your experience there?
those were wild, wild times. I wanted to have a gay practice. That was what my interest was, and then what came with that is HIV. And in 1987, we really didn't have any tools. We didn't have any successful treatments, and there were so many ill people, so many desperate people, and we had none of us as doctors had any training at all in how to manage this very serious illness, and so it was a very, very challenging time. I'm very fortunate in that I had my partner for support, but there were many doctors who, after a while, decided that they just couldn't handle it and either moved or changed the focus of their practice. It was a very challenging time.
I can imagine. And I mean, you were right on the ground as they were developing everything that they've got today, and you were on the
Right,
ground while those things were in development, right?
right from AZT monotherapy. That
What's
was the
that?
first. AZT was the very first antiretroviral or anti-HIV drug that was approved for use. Unfortunately, that drug really didn't pan out, and it took several years. It really wasn't until 1995 that we had good antiretroviral treatments, good treatments against HIV.
At that time, those diagnoses were considered a death sentence, and it came with so much underlying issues and stigma as well. So, can you talk a bit about that?
One of the things that was the most challenging thing at that time was telling a young man that he was HIV positive. It's not like it is today,
Right.
where it's a completely manageable disease, but to have someone in my office and then to get that result and have to tell that person that he was HIV positive was very, very difficult. And dealing with the people who were so ill, these young people who were so ill, and so many of them. That was also emotionally very, very challenging.
How was their care handled then? If there really was no treatment, were they deemed palliative pretty quickly? Was there places they
There were
could go?
there were certain things that we could do. There's an old drug called Septra, which is often used to treat urinary tract infections. But that drug is very good at preventing pneumocystis pneumonia, one of the most common presentations for people who had AIDS. But a lot of people were allergic to Septra. A lot of HIV positive were allergic to Septra, so we could use something called aerosolized pentamidine. People would go to a certain clinic where they would breathe in this antibiotic. So we did have some treatments for some of the secondary infections, but we didn't have good treatments against HIV to keep people healthy.
Was there a stigma about them being treated in hospital? Was there issues with them getting care in a hospital when it came to the point that they needed it? Were they getting most of their care from their physician like you, or?
That is something that we formed. There were about 30 of us, family doctors who care in Toronto and in the area who cared for people who were HIV positive at that time. And there were a number of problems that were coming up. One of them was that in order for people to get treated with medications against HIV, they had to be seen by an infectious diseases specialist, and those doctors were completely swamped. And so the waiting time for a patient to be seen by one of these doctors was very long. We formed a group called the Toronto HIV Primary Care Physicians Group. And so one of the things that we did was fought for the ability to prescribe these HIV medications. And so that as these treatments came along, we got government approval to prescribe them. It was a list of doctors, family doctors, who could prescribe HIV medications without the patient having to see an HIV or an infectious diseases specialist. So that was good for patients on a number of levels. But one of the important things is that they weren't outed by going to an HIV clinic at one of the large hospitals. So patients
Right.
could get care through their family doctor, and you wouldn't be outed as being HIV positive. So now, of course, the infectious disease specialists were very important because we could only manage the outpatient care, the prescription of the medications. But during those days, the patients were very ill with lots of opportunistic infections, and that's where the infectious diseases specialist time was best used, managing those problems and of course taking care of inpatients.
And what was happening at that time then when it came to palliative care for them? Was there options for hospice or for hospital care?
Have you heard of Casey House? The Casey House Hospice. That was the first
Yes,
AIDS
I have.
hospice that opened in the 80s, started by June Callwood, and it was called Casey House. Her son died, I think, in a car accident, and so she did tremendous fundraising, and so many people worked hard and donated time, money, and their expertise. So that hospice opened in the 80s. But we used to provide also, all of us who were providing HIV care, we all did house calls as well, every one of us, and keeping in mind that this was an infection that affected young men. They had all these guys had young, energetic friends as well, and so we, as a family doctor, I would go there once or twice a week to the person's home, but also there would be a whole care team of young people helping that person out. And we had whole protocol. We would have log books, and people would sign in, sign out. People could call me if there's anything in particular they were concerned about. And that was quite amazing how we came together during those times to allow someone to stay at home as long as possible. And many people died at home.
But what an amazing quality of care you were able to provide through that.
Yes, I can remember someone saying to me once, David, it must be hard treating people who are HIV positive because you're failing all the time. In other words, people are dying. And my approach at the time was that once I got over the fact that there's a young man who is dying, I thought, well, what can I do to make that person's life better?
Right.
And by being able to help that person to be at home as long as possible and to hopefully die at home, um, that made a big difference to a person's life. So I really didn't consider that what I was doing was failing. I was doing what I could to make someone's life better, and I think that I succeeded in that.
Well, absolutely.
Everyone did, the whole team, all of us took training in palliative care. Now, the younger doctors who care with patients who are HIV positive, that's not something that they deal with because this disease is so manageable. But palliative care was a big percentage of what we were doing, and so a lot of us, I took a course at Mount Sinai with their palliative care department, as did many of the other physicians, so that we could better care for our patients at home.
David, from a patient perspective, especially as new medications were being developed, how did that work from a patient perspective? How were they able to get involved in the process?
One of the things about HIV is it affected intelligent, dynamic young men. And these guys wanted to participate in the trials that they were engaged in. And so they wanted to be part of the trial design. And so with some of the early HIV trials, there were patient advisory groups that were closely involved in trial design. The patients were saying that we're not simply going to be a victim of a disease. We want to be engaged, and we want to make lives better for us and for people coming after us. And so it was a very interesting time that both patients and doctors were working together in trial design and working together to discover new things. And at HIV conferences, when I used to go to the HIV conferences, there were always patients there, and they could ask as intelligent question as any doctor could. It was quite an amazing time. As doctors, as family doctors, we spent a lot of our time in advocacy as well, trying to get our patients treated by dentists, for instance,
Right.
or trying to get a funeral home to take a body.
Wow.
These were all kinds of things that we had to do. So as family doctors, and then as HIV specialists and patients, advocacy was a large part of what we did.
So as time started to change and the disease started to change and the treatments more specifically started to change, how did that evolve your practice then?
There were so many challenges. There were many people were on disability because of having AIDS. And then around 1995, people started to get better.
That's awesome.
And so these guys who are on disability, they wanted a richer life. And so they wanted to think about integrating back into society again. And they wanted to think about working. And so this was a real challenging thing to deal with insurance companies. There had never been a model like this before. People who are on disability and then, long-term disability and then getting better. I mean, trying to think of another situation where that would be the case. Yeah, there was less reliance on the palliative care, of course. One of the things from a patient's perspective is they really had to rethink their lives. Many of them had quite a bit of debt that had accrued, and then suddenly realized I'm going to pay off all this debt.
Well, yeah, because they thought they were dying, right?
They thought they were dying.
Did it change the composition of your clinic, like patient-wise, or did you remain a gay practice through through your entire practice, or did that change at any
I
point?
had the main focus of my practice was that I had a gay practice, but I had what's kind of interesting. I had a small cohort of women, straight women in my practice, and there were a lot of women who actually preferred having a gay man as a doctor. They maybe didn't want to deal with a straight male doctor. They may have not wanted to deal with a straight female doctor and felt very comfortable with a gay male doctor. It's very interesting. It was a minority of my practice, but there were quite a few women.
That's amazing.
the other thing, I had families as well. There were, it's now changed. Now there are so many different kinds of families, but for many, I had several situations where there would be a man who, having been married for several years, would come out to his wife as gay. But they realized that they would realize that they were great companions. They had good life together, and so they decided to remain together. And very often, I had the wife in my practice as well, and sometimes the
Okay.
children, and sometimes the children.
Right. So what were some of the other challenges that some of your other patients faced?
Well, it was interesting. I had in my practice, I had both HIV positive and HIV negative patients, but I was known in the insurance world as someone who cared for a lot of HIV positive patients. And it was interesting that there were times when I believe that HIV negative patients were denied health insurance simply because I was their family doctor and I was considered to be an insurance risk to that person because because they might thought that that person was likely to become HIV positive or something like that.
Wow. And yeah, David, I think that's amazing. The work that you and the doctors that worked with you, all those HIV specialist doctors, were really the doctors that pioneered the way that healthcare is now for HIV patients. It's because of you putting your license on the line and yourself on the line and your character on the line to take those patients in and to really advocate for better treatment for them is why we have the healthcare for HIV patients that we have today.
Yeah, well, it's work that I'm very proud of, and all I know all the other physicians who were around at that time. They feel the same way.
You should be incredibly proud of it. That's pioneers work. It really is. So thank you for that. And did you stay in private practice until you retired, or did you go on to do any other things?
I was in solo practice for quite a few years, and then what year was that? It was around 1999, I think, or 2000. We formed what was called Maple Leaf Medical Clinic right across from Maple Leaf Gardens.
Okay.
And we started with five physicians, and then that clinic gradually it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we had physicians from Montreal and Halifax and Vancouver that wanted to join us. And so currently, Maple Leaf Medical Clinic, it's in its own building at Yonge and College with at least a dozen physicians, mostly family doctors, but part-time psychiatrist, psychologist. There's internal medicine. There's an internal medicine specialist, at least a couple infectious diseases specialists, a whole pharmacy team, and two research teams.
Wow.
So it's a big clinic now, and I was the first. I was among the first five that started that group.
What would you say the biggest thing in the community, in our community or any community that you've been that you've seen change in regards to LGBTQ plus rights overall?
Oh, there are so many things that, like, would I have ever believed that Chris and I would be married? I mean, like, we've been together 36 years now. We got married for our 20th.
Wow.
Would I ever think that sometimes a politician making an anti-gay slur, it would be the end of his career? Would I ever think that that would be possible? One of the things that is so important is the fact that we have all these spousal rights for
Absolutely.
pensions and so many things. And actually, it was my partner who was a teacher in the Toronto District School Board. Um, I sent in a prescription of mine, and he went to put it through his plan, and then of course, the insurance company refused it because they didn't recognize me as his partner. And
And
Chris
when was
took that.
that?
Oh God, 1990, maybe early 90s. I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
But Chris took it to the Human Rights Commission,
Amazing.
and then it was like this giant domino effect, and then suddenly all teachers in Toronto, at least in the Toronto District School Board, had all gay teachers had spousal rights.
Wow.
So that was something that happened, and my partner was instrumental in that. Now,
Well,
what's interesting? what's interesting is that Chris and I we were living here part time. We bought this place about 18 years ago. We decided to get married for our 20th, so that's not that long ago. But we couldn't get anyone in this area to marry us.
Really?
Yeah, no one. We
Wow.
asked a lot of people. We couldn't get anyone. We had to get someone from Toronto to come up from City Hall to get married.
Wow.
And that's only
And you're right,
16
that's
years.
not that long ago.
That's only 16 years ago.
Right.
I won't mention the church, but one minister said that this is 16 years ago. This isn't a whole generation ago. A minister said, I would be happy to do it, but I approached my congregation and they said no.
Wow. Wow.
So now things have changed since then, and we have neighbors who are elders in one of the churches in Grand Valley, and Chris and I have been invited to sing during their Christmas events, and it's interesting that that's changed completely in Grand Valley to some degree in some of the churches. I've sung in several of the churches in Grand Valley now.
That's amazing. I'm so glad to see that things continue to change. And, through Celebrate Your Awesome, we really acknowledge that there's still a lot of work to be done. And it's the equity work that we're really trying to promote and to change. But we wouldn't be able to do it without pioneers like you and Chris making those big, huge human rights changes when it comes to being recognized as a spouse and being able to be married and some of those spousal benefits, like you mentioned, that it's because of people like you who did that.
But there's still so much work to do. It's very conservative where we live here in East
Yep.
Garafaxa, and I've heard several painful stories, and I can think of one in particular about one young man who was kicked off the farm once his family found out that he was gay.
Oh,
These kind of things still happen today.
yeah.
This is one hour north of Toronto.
Did you or Chris encounter any problems with your families at all, or any issues with?
Not so much with Chris's family. For my family, it was more of a struggle. It was a struggle.
Yeah.
That was around year 5 of our relationship. But that was something that we were able to work through, and we did
Amazing.
successfully. And so then I would say that my bond and love for my parents was much stronger after we worked through all of that. But it wasn't easy.
Absolutely.
No.
And now, since your retirement, what are you up to?
My God, I'm loving retirement.
I was gonna say,
First
how
of
do you
all,
go from such a busy doctor life though to just you and Chris and enjoying your retirement? How does that work?
well, I think to have a successful retirement, you have to develop a lot of interests early on while you're working. I don't think you suddenly hit your 60s and then say, "Oh, I'm going to start doing this and that." It's you have to have had the seeds of interest developed in the young. So consequently, we've got all kinds of things that we're interested in, and there's so much going on in this community. Chris is a yoga instructor and works at one of the yoga studios. There's fantastic music here. Our main passion is gardening, but there's so much in the way of food that's happening here with the fantastic farmers market that's in Orangeville and so many
Mhm.
other people who are growing so many interesting things. Chris has found some fantastic cheesemakers in the area. So retirement is glorious, particularly being up here in Dufferin County.
That's
It
awesome.
has so much to offer.
Now, I know when I first met you and Chris, you guys talked heavily about how much you love to travel and enjoy food around the world. And how has COVID affected you guys, especially in your retirement, with not being able to travel? Are you excited to get back out there?
I am, and it was interesting that it was not really part of the game plan that we would spend the entire winter in East Garafaxa. The winters here in East Garafaxa are pretty tough,
Absolutely.
tougher than Orangeville.
Yeah.
So, but we got ourselves a really good snowblower, and we've got lots of wood for heat and geothermal. So anyway, so we're comfortable and warm. I got my piano to play, and then actually Chris has been doing a lot of online yoga. He belongs to one organization where he does yoga every day online, so
Oh,
he's
wow.
able to do that. And now it's interesting with the pandemic. I used to sing in the Toronto Mendelssohn Choir for quite a few years, as did Chris. But with the commuting, it's just too far going back and forth. So I had
Right.
to let that go. But they were doing online concerts. So I was able to do that at home right here. So I was able to still sing with the Mendelssohn Choir here at our dining room table. I
That's amazing.
also help out at now a very good friend of mine, Greg Dickinson, who's the choir master and organist at St. Mark's. I help him along with his Sunday services as well, and that was all done online once a week. So I do hymns for St. Mark's, and then plus Chris and I belong to a gay choir in Guelph. We did some online singing with them as well. So we were able to do a lot of stuff online, but I am looking forward to getting back to traveling someday.
That's fantastic.
I'm not rushing into it though.
No.
We were in India, in Goa, in March of 2020, and we had to get
Wow.
home, and it was not easy getting home.
If you could say 3 things right now that you hope to see accomplished for the LGBTQ plus community in the next 5 years.
What I would like to see is people able to express themselves sexually without judgment. It seems that like in the old days, you had to declare yourself as gay.
Right.
And so it was like a big political thing that you said that you were gay. But there are a lot of people that actually weren't completely gay. There were a lot of people who were actually bi. But if you said you were bi, people just thought you were gay and but not fully out of the closet. There are a lot of people who really express themselves differently. There are a lot of patients that I met towards the end of my career that saw themselves as gender fluid. Um, and um, so I would like to see people being able to express themselves without judgment.
That's awesome.
Express who they are without judgment and without having to be pigeonholed. And I think that happens when there's less, when you feel less need to, let's say, declare yourself as gay or declare yourself as whatever. I would like to see continued work for gay refugees in other countries.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
that was something that I was involved with in a number of years ago. There were a number of HIV positive refugee claimants who arrived in Toronto, and there was no one who could speak any Spanish at that time. And so I got myself a private tutor, and so I ended up with about 30 HIV positive refugee claimants from Latin countries who many of these guys were facing physical danger. Also, they couldn't get treatment in their own countries. I think things are changing now. Another thing that I was involved with is that there were a number of Chechen gays who came to Toronto via Moscow. And there were a lot of people who helped those guys get integrated into Canadian society. But there are so many people. I think we have it pretty good in Canada right now as gay
Right.
people, but there are so many people who are suffering, and I would like to see continued work to help gay people who face persecution and potentially death in other countries. So that's something I would like to see continued work in that area. And I think we still have a lot of work here in our own country. I find it like I was raised Anglican, and I find it hard to believe that the Anglican Church does not condone gay marriage. I mean, it's hard to believe. The
Right.
Anglican Church in Canada does not condone gay marriage.
Well, David, thank you so much. I think we've hit our time. So I'm so grateful for you being so candid in in answering my questions. And I've learned so much about your experiences. And I'm so grateful that you were sharing so openly with me. So thank you so much.
Well, it was a real pleasure. It was a real pleasure, Lisa.
Thank you.